This episode seemed ill-fated right from the beginning. Just look at the absurdity of it all. Meghan is shown baking bread, but it is clear she is only pretending. How can one tell? She pulls a loaf from the oven, making a show of wearing oven mitts as though it is piping hot. Yet moments later, she handles the parchment paper and the bread itself with her bare hands, something no genuine baker would do straight from the oven. There is no steam, no heat, only a cooled loaf being presented as if it were fresh. The whole performance feels unnecessary. Why go through the theatrics of oven mitts if the illusion crumbles so quickly? It convinces no one. Netflix truly should have tried harder. That outfit was a disaster bordering on criminal in the realm of fashion. A massive shirt tied at the waist paired with a ribbed sweater skirt, it looked utterly juvenile. No offence to 12-year-olds, but the combination was absurd. The clashing fabrics, the awkward textures, and the mismatched colours created nothing but chaos. It was messy, unflattering, and difficult to watch. Perhaps the infamous red dress was just as dreadful, but this ensemble was certainly a contender for the worst. Keeping with the unfortunate theme of this second episode, the guest was Chrissy Teigen, an unusual choice to put it mildly. It felt as though Meghan was struggling so desperately to secure names with at least some degree of fame that she was even willing to invite figures long criticised and shunned by Hollywood for past behaviour. The desperation was palpable, and it set the tone for an episode that was ill-fated from the very start. Meghan seems unable to secure truly notable guests, so she resorts to those whose reputations have already crumbled. Cancelled celebrities. Why not? Chrissy Teigen is perhaps the most recognisable name to appear on Time's archetypes times apart from Mindy Kaling, at least from what I recall. But that is hardly a compliment to the show. Chrissy is not a towering A-list star. She is better known for whom she married than for her own career. Certainly, she found success as a model, but her fame rests more on association than achievement, much like Meghan herself. More revealing, however, is what this choice tells us about Meghan's values. By inviting Chrissy, she signalled that principles mattered less than securing a guest with some degree of recognition. Either she dismissed Chrissy's past behaviour as trivial, or she chose to overlook it entirely. In either case, the decision speaks volumes. What does it say about Meghan when she is willing to host someone long criticised for cruelty without so much as a second thought? Meghan appears unable to find guests, so she is scraping the very bottom of the barrel, inviting those whose reputations have already been tarnished, cancelled celebrities, if you will. Chrissy Teigen is by far the most recognisable name to have appeared on the show, perhaps apart from Mindy Kaling as I recall, but that is hardly a testament to its calibre. We are not speaking of a towering A-lister here, rather someone better known for whom she married than for what she has accomplished in her own career. Not that she lacks success as a model, yet the fame feels more associative than earned, much as one might say of Meghan herself. More importantly, the choice of guest reveals something of Meghan's character. It suggests that principles such as opposing online bullying, particularly of young people, are negotiable when a name is needed for the programme. Meghan and Harry have positioned themselves as champions of a safer online space and have spoken about protecting the youth. Yet here is Chrissy Teigen, a figure most notably implicated in the very kind of online cruelty Meghan professes to oppose. How such a booking passed through production is puzzling, and how Meghan reconciles it with her attempts at image rehabilitation is equally perplexing. To mount this grand charm offensive in 2025, to prove she has friends and that she is a pleasant person, while simultaneously inviting someone criticised for bullying, reads as either astonishingly unaware, willfully dismissive. Look too at the small gestures she offers every visitor a drink upon arrival, as if hospitality might paper over a deeper inconsistency. She had clearly worked awfully hard to persuade people that she was kind. She prepared rose water for her guests of all things, only to undermine the whole endeavour by inviting an infamous online bully onto the programme. One could scarcely make it up. Setting that aside for a moment, let us consider the episode itself. I take issue with something she said at the outset. She kept insisting that ricotta is a cousin of cream cheese, one that people ought to see more often. Those overworked sound bites, which she evidently thinks clever land instead as clumsy and rather foolish. If anything is a cousin to cream cheese, it is mascarpone. Ricotta is quite different. It has a grainier texture, is looser and more watery, and lacks the tang or gentle sourness of cream cheese. Mascarpone sits much closer to cream cheese in character, not ricotta if one must engage in such a fanciful simile at all. To be fair and balanced, Chrissy Teigen's bubbly manner did much to brighten the drab, beige, rather bland world that Meghan Markle presented. She was chatty and vivacious, and especially when placed beside Meghan's flat, vacant delivery. Chrissy was a genuine burst of energy, and that is saying rather a great deal. My principal complaint about Chrissy Teigen's appearance on the programme concerns her nails. Those long talon-like nails pressed into the dough struck me as thoroughly unpleasant, because long fingernails, indeed any fingernails, but especially those that extend beyond the fingertips, harbour a great deal of bacteria. It is unsanitary and frankly rather revolting. I would not even permit anyone with long artificial nails near my newborn. You are not going to touch my baby with long nails. To see such nails being squashed into dough that people are going to eat is simply nauseating. Furthermore, the episode contained 10 too many moments spent fussing with a kitchen scale. Meghan did this at the beginning of the programme, and then again alongside Chrissy Teigen in the middle as they measured ingredients for bread and later for crackers, adding the tiniest amount at a time in an attempt to reach the precise weight in grams. It was tedious to watch, neither funny nor relatable, merely ridiculous, and rather tellingly it revealed how inexperienced Meghan truly is in the kitchen. Who thought this would make good television, watching them fuss endlessly over a scale? If you bake regularly, and especially if you weigh your ingredients as you ought to, you develop an eye for how much an ingredient weighs. You learn to judge by eye, and to top up a little, if necessary, rather than adding minute pinches as if guessing for the first time. With staples one uses all the time, such as flour, you become familiar with the feel and the weight. I can measure out 120 grams of flour very quickly and easily because I do it constantly. The halting tiny adjustments Meghan and Chrissy made simply do not read as the practice movements of habitual bakers. If anything, they showed that Meghan is unfamiliar with using a kitchen scale. This episode finds Meghan preparing rose water and, together with Chrissy, crafting resin-dried flower pendants. I must again question the choice of activities they feel either astonishingly mundane or completely unattainable. Remember the balloon arch from episode 1. These faux tutorials oscillate between the boringly ordinary and the peculiarly privileged. Many of the little crafts require specialist equipment and materials, whether it is the apparatus to distill rose water or the supplies for cast resin, and that places them beyond the reach of a great many viewers. There is a tone deafness to these segments that is hard to ignore. Suggesting that one should dry fruit because one has an abundance of citrus from an orchard, as was implied in season 1, is not advice that resonates with most people. How many are going to rush out and purchase a glut of citrus merely to dry it at home, or invest time and effort to distill rose water from scratch? The result is a programme that sometimes feels unrelatable, offering pastimes that only a few can easily replicate, rather than practical, warm-hearted pastimes that invite the ordinary viewer to join in. It often feels as though these moments amount to nothing more than watching Meghan potter about. Nobody truly wants to watch her potter yet. That appears to be the entire point of those segments. She is not particularly entertaining, charismatic or charming, so it does not make for good television. As Helen Coffey put it in her one-star review, watching this is like being gaslit by a multimillionaire. The Duchess of Thoughtful Touches returns with another parade of celebrity guests, accompanied by fiddly crafts and dishes made from scratch. It is a pity that her brand of wildly aspirational hostessing will leave many viewers feeling inadequate. There are easy ways to show up lovingly, Meghan says, and indeed the word easy seems to be the watchword for the entire 8-episode run, and it is doing rather a lot of heavy lifting. The point is that much of what she demonstrates is not actually easy, whether it involves sourcing specialised materials for a supposedly simple task, or undertaking projects that are costly, time-consuming, or simply impractical. These segments often read as anything but effortless. She makes homemade graham cracker s'mores with vanilla bean and turmeric marshmallows, and then announces with a smile that there is one she made earlier. Tonal chocolate bark is apparently easy. Whipping up boba tea and imaginative sourdough toppings is easy. Crafting necklaces from pressed flowers to mark each child's birth month and setting them in ultraviolet resin is easy. In the surreal and saccharine world of actor turned royal turned Instagram grid, brought to life, nothing, it seems, is complicated. In reality, however, these are investments of time, energy and effort that most people at this particular moment are unlikely to be inspired to attempt, especially not on the strength of Meghan's suggestions. The second outing of this madly aspirational hostessing show does not stray far from the format of its predecessor. Each instalment finds an impeccably, if blandly presented, Meghan swaddled in neutral tones as she invites guests round to a house in Montecito. It is not her house, obviously, but a rental property, which renders the whole at home with brand feel slightly bogus. References to Prince Harry and their children are generally kept sporadic and vague. She trills to an awkward John Legend, who one assumes was contractually obliged to pop into the kitchen when his wife Chrissy Teigen arrived, and it all felt rather staged. Each episode finds Meghan assembling an over-the-top snack or drink for her guests' arrival before obliging them to take part in a contrived making and baking activity, for example, painting children's aprons with neat rows of stamps, an exercise that reads as oddly unhinged. To ensure nobody leaves empty-handed, she then presents an aggressively thoughtful, handmade gift to every visitor, home-distilled rosewater, a silk scarf decorated with a water marbling effect and the like. These are not the sorts of presents one gives in ordinary company. What struck me most was an especially extravagant offering that appears in a forthcoming episode. I shall not spoil it here, but it exemplifies how overblown and peculiar the gifts can be. If one ran a shop, or pursued these crafts as a pastime or a profession, the gestures might make sense. Yet these are not pursuits Meghan is known for. She is not, for instance, a devotee of distilling rosewater. The whole collection of crafts and curios feels random, excessive, and rather strange. It truly does. It is particularly striking when one remembers that these guests are for the most part already comfortably well off Chrissy Teigen, Mindy Kaling, Jay Shetty. They do not need homemade rosewater, and if such a thing appealed to them, they would very likely already possess it. The thought, to be sure, counts, but in this context it reads as peculiar, and I find it hard to put my finger on exactly why. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. Aesthetic here is everything edible flowers, scattered with alarming abandon ribbons tied into perfect bows, round, colour-matched presents. Even when the bright, airy kitchen is put to use to marinate steaks and to pound flatbreads, it somehow never becomes truly messy. Thanks, one must presume, to the 80-strong crew who labour to create an effortless ambience. It is as if an artificial intelligence had been fed every Nancy Meyers film ever made and instructed to disgorge a television series. I can just about appreciate the appeal of a programme that offers pure escapism at a moment when the world feels uncertain and hostile, yet the stakes are so low as to be almost non-existent. The faintest hint of drama arrives courtesy of attempts to weigh out exactly 113 grams of water for a sourdough starter. I do not like the pressure Meghan squeals when Chang says he is excited to try her vinaigrette, but there is no pressure at all. Nothing ever can or will go wrong in this cosseted fictional slice of Californian lifestyle. The main takeaway for the casual viewer is a dull sense of inadequacy. How else are the rest of us supposed to feel when we are being gaslit by a multimillionaire who insists that constructing homemade necklaces or arranging flowers is a cinch? She utters the line from the comfort of her craft barn while lecturing us whilst grilling French toast that it is not as complicated as most people imagine to make a hot breakfast for your partner or for your children every morning. I am merely a working woman, not even a working parent, yet I can still feel the burgeoning tendrils of shame unfurling when I consider my own morning ritual of tipping cereal into a bowl. And yet the show's purpose does not appear to be to demonstrate how one might reasonably pull off these rather preposterous feats. Recipes are only half explained, and the specifics of paints and craft materials are not actually shared. It is as if the producers already know that no one in their right mind is going to attempt this stuff, which only compounds the problem of omitting the tutorial meat of it. If you are not genuinely offering a tutorial, it very much feels like you are merely watching her perform the tasks while she insists that it is so easy. I can understand the sense of inadequacy that might come across in the viewer. In that case, it is a show, as I have been saying for ages, that needs to be carried by the talent kept afloat by such an abundance of warmth, wit and charm that it resembles a hug in a mug, as Meghan describes one of her homemade beverages. Unfortunately, she is not the person to deliver such a thing, plumping instead for cloying sentimentality and flavourless wholesomeness. It brings me so much joy to see everyone just having fun and trying so many cool new things, Meghan says earnestly at the end of episode 1 as she toasts a marshmallow over the bonfire with her new friends. Excuse me while I book an emergency dentist appointment. The whole thing is as sickly sweet as a vanilla bean and turmeric s'more. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I cannot wait to read them. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I will see you next time. Have a happy day, everyone. Goodbye. The embarrassment seemed endless. Yet almost immediately from the very beginning, there were those strange, forced laughs.
First date.
Double date.
Double date. Awesome.
Shall we make a little welcome snap?
We see the same gestures. We see the same expressions. One cannot help but ask, what, why it? Is either a carefully staged version of Meghan or a painfully awkward one. There never seems to be a middle ground, unless perhaps in those moments when she appears particularly annoyed. The first episode of Season 2 follows the very same pattern as Season 1, though with two noticeable differences that are rather amusing. It appears Meghan was required to record a considerable amount of voiceover for this season, giving the whole thing a patchwork feel that is both obvious and distracting. This second part, which was marketed as Season 2, relied heavily on this cut-and-paste style of voiceover, because the criticisms during the first release had been so loud. And the technique is easy to spot. Whenever a voiceover appears, the camera zooms in far too closely on hands, on food, on anything at all, or the shot shifts to the back of someone's head. Then, over the top of it, comes Meghan's voice, delivering something just a shade more polished than what she originally said. In the first episode, we meet Christina Tosi and David Chang, both of whom are highly successful chefs in their own right. They arrive to visit Meghan and Daniel being the makeup artist we first encountered in part 1. From the moment Christina and David step into the kitchen, they clearly take the lead, guiding the cooking and carrying much of the show during their segments. Their experience is undeniable. Not only are they accomplished chefs, but they are also comfortable in front of the camera, well versed in the rhythms of food television. This certainly helps, though, only to a degree. The difficulty lies in the way the programme is presented. It is framed as though Meghan herself is demonstrating, instructing and teaching the audience. Yet, in reality, the visiting chefs often assume control of the most important and engaging parts of the episode. For the viewer, this creates a sense of disconnect. It feels disjointed, even confusing. Had the series been conceived and filmed from the outset as Meghan inviting MasterChef to teach her new skills, the dynamic would have been very different, much more natural and compelling. Instead, the production relies heavily on voiceovers to patch things together, attempting to steer the narrative closer to that idea, but never quite bridging the gap. That said, one improvement is evident. The director, or perhaps the Netflix team, seems to have won the argument with Meghan about introducing her guests properly. This season, they inserted a voiceover introduction that, although rather abrupt and unmistakably added in post-production, finally explains who the guests are, their restaurants, their businesses, and their achievements. It is the right choice, and something that should have been present in part 1. At the time, it was one of the most frustrating omissions to see a celebrated chef appear on screen and have no explanation at all of who they were. It made me wonder why they had not done this from the very beginning. The best explanation I can imagine is that Meghan resisted giving those more formal introductions, saying, for example, "This is so-and-so, the chef of this restaurant, the author of these cookbooks, the host of that programme." She seemed determined not to do that. Perhaps she wanted it to appear casual, as though these celebrated chefs were simply friends, dropping by to join her show. It carried a sense of, if you know, almost a form of gatekeeping. Maybe she thought it would seem cooler, more spontaneous, or even more impressive. An unspoken suggestion that she belonged to this world already, that she was part of the circle and therefore needed no explanation. It feels as though the choice came from that place, because otherwise it makes very little sense not to properly introduce such notable guests in the first season. The way it came across in the first season was not only confusing, but also rather discourteous. Properly introducing the guests provides context, explains why they are there, and quite importantly, shows respect. It is simply good etiquette, and at the same time gives something back to the guests by highlighting their achievements. To be fair, that improvement was noticeable in the first episode of this season, and I do hope it continues. As I mentioned earlier, this season is saturated with voiceovers far more than in part 1. The entire thing feels like a patchwork quilt of voiceovers and unnaturally close shots used in order to make the existing footage workable. It is extraordinary, unlike anything I have ever seen. A sort of disembodied Meghan narrates lines that are far less awkward, a little less self-focused, and occasionally more informative than before. It still does not amount to a clear step-by-step guide one could follow to replicate the recipes. However, there are moments where the voiceovers sprinkle in extra details. For example, Meghan might casually say, "We are going to bake this at 350 degrees for such and such a time." That kind of information was almost entirely absent in part 1. Yet here in part 2 it appears, if only sparingly. To be fair, it is another small improvement, and this moment serves as a good example.
Yeah.
Turn the heat off.
And it steams.
Yeah, that's all you need, a little bit of that, and we're ready to go.
That's a good pro tip. She's so pretty, our little gal.
Ready to go.
That's a good pro tip.
As you can see, it becomes rather obvious. The camera suddenly zooms in, and then comes this neatly polished voiceover, something along the lines of, "Oh, that is a pro tip." It is so clearly an addition made in post-production, and it is almost amusing once you realise the context the producers knew Meghan's presence was putting people off, so they tried to patch it up in editing. It feels as though someone told her, just say something nice, anything at all. But even with all the voiceovers, there are some things they cannot disguise. Her expressions, for instance, are telling. She often carries an air of irritation, as though she is not really enjoying the cooking, or perhaps not enjoying sharing the spotlight. I am not certain which island. To be clear, I do not think she should sit there with a forced smile plastered on her face from start to finish. Yet, from what we saw in the first season, it is evident that some element of this experience does not truly suit her. That look of discomfort, bordering on annoyance, appears again and again, and this is why it does not feel authentic. If someone genuinely enjoyed being in the kitchen, their neutral expression in the quieter moments would appear calm and relaxed, perhaps even content. What we see instead is a face that reads as negative. It feels forced, as though something about the process frustrates her, whether it is being unable to talk about herself, not receiving the praise she expects from her guests, or simply disliking the tasks at hand. We may never know. What we do see is that sour look breaking through, despite the narrative of this being her dream fulfilled. Listening only to her words, one would believe this is exactly the life she always wanted. But watching her face between the lines, between the rehearsed smiles and the moment she addresses the camera, it tells quite a different story. Throughout the series, there are these little cutaway segments where Meghan takes on a sort of craft tutorial. In one, for example, she tried water marbling. For those unfamiliar, it is rather like tie-dye, except you drop colours onto a pan of thickened water and then press fabric onto the surface to lift the pattern. As expected though, it was not presented as a genuine tutorial. It was more of a watch Meghan do this moment, which frankly is not something anyone is particularly eager for. Simply observing her attempt to craft does not carry much appeal. Beyond that, one has to wonder just how relatable or practical water marbling is for most people right now. Was it really the best choice for a demonstration? It feels like a missed opportunity, a failure to read the room. The crafts she chooses often seem a little out of reach activities that require specialised equipment or costly materials, making them impractical for a wide audience. The impression is that these are hobbies suited only to a select few, rather than something that viewers might feel inspired to try themselves. Interestingly, a review in Town & Country noted that many of the guests featured in this round of somewhat lacklustre episodes are themselves connected to Netflix. I had not realised this, as I do not follow the platform closely, but it does cast the guest list in a different light. What this really means is that the guests this time around are a bit more seasoned, or a bit more at ease in front of the camera. That does help to smooth over some of the awkwardness, creating a slightly more polished experience. But it also reveals something else, that Netflix had to rely on its own network of talent. They pulled strings, leaned on existing working relationships, and persuaded people already connected to the platform to appear likely because no one else was eager to sign on. It is equally clear that Netflix assumed far more control over this second batch of episodes. Meghan's endless sound bites about herself and her personal life have been scaled back almost certainly to protect the show from further criticism. They must have realised that this is not the sort of content viewers seek out in a food or lifestyle series. Perhaps it was also an attempt to salvage the programme's reputation ahead of a planned holiday special. Whatever the motivation, one cannot deny they put in the effort. Now then, let us turn to what Times, the Telegraph Times, had to say about it. There is more tone deafness from the so-called Montecito Marie Antoinette. Prince Harry is notably absent from the second series of Times with Love, Meghan Times, which feels needy and only slightly less eccentric than the first. Would anyone care for a turmeric marshmallow? Perhaps it is time to fill the refrigerator with sea urchins, or maybe unwind by binding your own books or crafting a pressed flower pendant for your dog. Perfectly relatable pastimes of course. It seems that someone at Netflix, conscious of the fact that the previous series ranked 383rd on the streamers list of most watched shows, has insisted that we need more appearances from Harry. Yet, I am not entirely convinced. I suspect Meghan simply mentions him because, well, he is her husband. This series was filmed all at once, so it seems unlikely that anyone went back and instructed her to talk about Harry more. Perhaps his absence is deliberate. Harry, never the sharpest knife in the drawer, might easily wander into this carefully stage-managed world and say something awkward. One can almost imagine him asking, "Whose house is this? Why are you pretending you have never done any of these activities before? Who makes their own salt and vinegar crisps? Do we still keep in touch with anyone who attended our wedding?" The second series claims to revolve around the theme of friendship, and Meghan may well have a few openings in that department. We have friends coming new friends. "I love making friends," she proclaims in the very first episode. This series is only slightly less eccentric than the first. Who could forget Meghan hosting a children's party without inviting a single child? Yet it feels even needier. She offers personalised drinks to every guest who enters and sends them home with extravagant gifts. When Jay and Radhi Shetty are mentioned, we hear that they host a games night every Friday for 40 friends. One can almost see Meghan's mind racing, calculating how to secure a place on that guest list. She is eager to remind us of her inclusivity and generous spirit. Meghan is, after all, famously kind to staff just ask anyone at Buckingham Palace. But these friendships, whether long-standing or freshly minted, come at a cost. A punishing schedule disguised as leisure. The so-called relaxed gatherings are orchestrated with military precision. The instant a dish slides into the oven, guests are briskly ushered to the craft barn to embark on a new activity. By fortunate coincidence, Meghan excels at each and every one. In the opening episode, she plunges into competitive flower arranging, and unsurprisingly, her own creation is crowned the finest, rather like a child determined to win all the games at her own birthday celebration. Indeed, much of the series carries the atmosphere of a 10-year-old's party, potato printing aprons, making delicately scented soaps, and endless rounds of admiration directed toward the hostess. "You just make everything so beautiful," sighs Mr. Smith. "I am so inspired by you," declares Miss Dorak. These remarks, it is whispered, were hardly spontaneous. Allegedly, Meghan distributed a list of suggested compliments in case her guests found themselves at a loss for words. She speaks for the very first time about her brief stint as a model on Time's Deal or No Deal. Teigen, who once shared the stage as a fellow briefcase girl, had not crossed paths with Meghan for 2 decades until Meghan reached out a few years ago. One senses they are not especially fond of each other, though Teigen dutifully goes along with the reunion. At one point, Meghan explains that the flower pendants they are making will take 24 hours to set, "which means I shall have to send this to you," she says cheerfully. For the briefest instant, Tegan's expression shifts first horror at the thought of an overnight stay, then unmistakable relief upon realising she is free to leave before dawn. Hours after her arrival, Teigen struggles to recall the birthday of one of Meghan's children, despite having the dates tattooed on her arm. In exasperation, she calls out to Legend for help, only for it to be revealed that he has been banished to another room for the entire visit. The quality of each episode rests squarely on the calibre of its guests. When larger-than-life Andres or the charming food writer Sam Norstrad appear, the show brightens. They are warm, engaging, and effortlessly watchable. David Chang, another celebrated restaurateur who does not seem overawed by Meghan's presence, is also a highlight. The three of them speak knowledgeably about food elevating the conversation. But with less dynamic company, the episodes quickly become dull, even tiresome. Still, Meghan cannot resist placing her own recipes on equal footing with those of these accomplished chefs, a comparison that feels more than a little ambitious. Like a Montecito Marie Antoinette, she steps out of her home to discover that the production team has conjured up an impromptu flower market worth thousands of dollars from which she may leisurely select blooms to arrange. It is without doubt a gilded existence. Yet now and then, reality slips through the cracks. At one moment, she opens a kitchen drawer and gasps in alarm. Oh, that is not pretty. That must not be in the shot, she warns the director before slamming it shut. What lay inside? A tangle of clutter, perhaps? Or something more curious, a voodoo doll of the Princess of Wales? We shall never know. As the closing credits roll, the soundtrack pleads, do not let it be the last time. One cannot help but echo a quieter hope. Please let it be the last time.